and slept on my brother's couch.
Hmm.
And just so you know, that was pretty desperate because at the time, my brother is 4 years younger than me. So
Okay.
he was in his bachelor pad with his roommate, and it smelled like gym socks and stale cigarette butts. So there were a couple of times where I literally left and went
Yeah.
and slept on my brother's couch. So it was kind of this progression. And there were, several things I had to work through. I felt super guilty about leaving my pets behind.
Yeah.
And I remember a woman who was probably about 15 years older than me who had been through divorce in the past. And I remember going to lunch with her, and she said, Christine, if you're worried about the pets and that's your biggest worry, like you're done with this relationship.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Living Room Wisdom, where your story is your glory. I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to someone that I was introduced to, I don't know, probably last year sometime we connected. And I've been following her. We've had some really great conversations on Zoom, and I'm honestly just really impressed by how she has created this conversation around money in such a way that feels so attractive, but also non-threatening for women.
Mm.
And so this is Christine Luken, and she is a financial dignity coach. That alone says so much. And her joy and her superpower is serving women, especially high earning professionals, businesswomen, but also supporting women who have faced challenges like divorce and things of that nature to really take back control of their lives. So, not only is she a financial dignity coach, but she also is an author of a book called Money is Emotional. And she leads a book club called Wealthy Women Book Club. Right. So, all of
Yes.
that sounds like something we all want to be a part of. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that in your own words and kind of where that all came from.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I am honored to be here and to talk to your audience. So, I always love to tell people that I did not get into financial coaching because I have always done things perfect. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So, I crashed and burned financially in my mid 20s, despite having an accounting degree. And the short story behind that was I was dating and then engaged to a guy. We were together for 7 years. He was terrible with money. He
Mhm.
was in and out of jobs and even in and out of jail. And I thought if I just loved him enough that he would change. And he did. He got worse.
Oh, gee.
So at age 26, I found myself financially in a hole. All of the debt that we accumulated was in my name because he didn't have any credit. And so I found myself wanting to leave this relationship, and I literally had no money to leave.
Mm.
And so I had to eat a big slice of humble pie because I felt very ashamed and embarrassed of the mess that I had gotten myself into. And I reached out to my dad, and thankfully, he did not say, I told you so. How could you do this? You know better. Now, he could have said that and it would
Right.
have been the truth.
Yeah.
But he met me in that place of dignity and said, here's what I'm going to do for you. You can move back in with me and your stepmom for a few months. I'm not going to pay your debt. I'm not going to bail you out. However, what I will do is I will give you a safe place to regroup, and I will sit down and I will help you to create a plan to rectify your financial situation. And so that was really the turning point. And of course, at the time, it it felt terrible, right? That
Mhm.
hitting rock bottom, it was like I thought this was the person that I was going to marry. Now I knew that, you know, and I get it. We started dating when we were like 18 and 19, and when you're that age, it's like, yeah, you party, you're irresponsible, but at some point you have to start growing up.
Mhm.
And he just did not want to get out of that lifestyle. And so there were a lot of other dysfunctions within that relationship just besides just the money. And so moving back in with my dad and stepmom, it was, it felt like a big step backwards
Mhm.
because most of my friends were in serious relationships. They were getting engaged, they were getting married, they were, starting on this really great career trajectory. And here I was back at my parents' house in a
Yeah,
hole. Um, but it was honestly the best thing that I could have done because that situation was not going to get any better.
of
So
course.
yeah.
I have a couple questions. I have a couple of
Yeah.
questions for you. So, how old were
Yeah.
you when you all started dating? You said you were in your teens.
Yeah. So he was actually a year younger than me. So I was 19, he was 18.
Okay.
And
So
we were
yeah, like
together for 7 years.
fresh out of high school, pretty much.
Yeah.
And you were
Yeah.
together 7 years. You said you worked together. So obviously that was like a
No, we did not work
okay.
together. I did not
Okay.
work with my ex. He
Oh.
was he probably had 17 jobs in the 7 years that we were together.
Oh, well, that's funny.
Yes, he changed jobs like most people change their socks.
Okay. Okay. So you meet at a very young
uh,
age. You guys are together for 7 years. I'm assuming during that time you all moved in together and started
oh
creating a life
yes.
together. And did
Yeah.
you all eventually marry?
No, I actually left we were engaged. I gave the wedding ring back. His mom had co-signed for it because he couldn't afford to buy it on
Right.
his own. Yeah, I had the wedding dress in the closet, the whole 9 yards. We had an apartment together, we had pets together, we were financially entangled together.
You married
His
without the piece of paper, essentially.
That's exactly right. I call
Yeah.
it my almost divorce because I almost got married.
My
It
goodness.
was pretty much the same emotional roller coaster without having to go to court. So,
Yes.
I'm just thankful that, we didn't get married and that we didn't have kids together because he wanted kids. And I'm like, you can't even take care of yourself.
Yourself. Yeah, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
so tell me, I would like to go into the kind of the mindset and your self image or self identity during that time period.
Mm,
Obviously, initially there was probably attraction and chemistry and things in
hmm.
common and it was exciting, but then once you're in the relationship and you start to see these signs of like, okay, we're getting older, we're maturing, he's not. Right?
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
his habits, his level of responsibility is not shifting for the better. So what was your thought process? Take us back to that. What were you feeling emotionally? What were you thinking? And why did you stay in it? Like at what point did you start to realize this isn't the relationship for me?
Yeah. Well, and I think this is pretty common for, and I didn't realize that this was a codependent,
Hmm.
emotionally abusive, manipulative relationship until I left and
Right.
got therapy, which I highly recommend. Um, because it was these very small incremental shifts that
Hmm.
happened, early in the relationship where, it was almost like he was kind of testing the waters of what I would tolerate and what I would put up with. And so, it wasn't, by the end of the relationship, he was doing things like spending our rent money on weed. He was, there were cops coming to the house at 3 o'clock in the morning looking for him because he was in violation of, what he was supposed to do for his second DUI.
Okay.
And so, it didn't start that way, but it was, some of these incremental things where, there were these little run-ins with the law and having too much to drink and,
Yeah.
and then it just continually got worse.
It sounds
Um,
like he had some issues of his own that he was
he
dealing
did.
with. And at such an early age, we don't have the language. We can't really articulate. We don't really have the awareness to understand
Yeah.
what's going on within ourselves. And so we'll give
Hmm.
grace to him and just say, hey, he was out of his control. But as far
Right.
as you're concerned, then you're growing, you're developing. Again, you've come into this kind of as fresh, naive woman with, open
Hmm.
eyes. And then as you started to notice things, just take us through some of the steps that you took or some of the shifts that you made during the relationship that made you strong enough to leave.
Well, I think I finally realized that there was something wrong when I was having recurring dreams that he died, and I
Woo!
actually felt relieved.
Holy crap.
And, when I started to think about those dreams, it was almost like I finally realized I wanted the relationship to end, but I didn't want to be at fault for it.
Ooh, that good girl thing, right? Heaven forbid we hurt somebody's
Yes.
feelings.
Yeah, and that good girl thing was very strong
Okay.
in me. And I finally realized I I am going to have to embrace this conflict in order to come out the other side. And I think that was one of the reasons why things, kept building up because, he would push me and say, like, I would always say if I had $5, he'd try to talk me out of 10. And I was someone who didn't like conflict. And, the crazy thing was, like, my parents never fought in front of my brother and I growing up. And yet, after 19 years of marriage, they got divorced. And my brother and I were just in shock. Like,
What
they're
happened?
they're joking, right? Like, I don't
Yes.
understand what's going on. And so obviously we didn't have healthy conflict really modeled for us, to
Yes.
show parents working through those differences, because whenever they did behind closed doors, and it was never, never in
Yes.
front of us at all. So, it's like, yeah, I
I
appreciate
think
that
our
there weren't.
I think our generation though was parented that way, right? Like it
Yeah.
was very this is what it looks like on the outside, but there might be something completely going different going on the inside. But I
Yeah.
think because they were trying to heal their parental wounds or whatever, like to
Hmm.
do things better than their parents, that they modeled something different. And honestly, I was guilty of it myself. With my
Hmm.
late husband, with my first two children, my two oldest children, it was the same thing. If we had conflict, which we didn't have conflict often, but when we did, children never saw that. They've never seen us argue. I'm also not a very argumentative type person. Like I protect my peace.
Right.
But it was the same thing where as they started growing up, they started articulating to me that they were having trouble with communicating and conflict resolution because they had never seen it modeled. And
Yeah.
so for yourself, did you eventually go to your parents and get some coaching? Like, how did you get over the hump to where you were able to leave? And how did you get out of that situation?
Yeah. So it was interesting because a couple months before I left that relationship, I started working for the family business, which my dad founded with
Okay.
several other partners. I never reported to my dad, which was actually very wise on his part. Um, However, one of the one of the things that they did for a lot of the employees is they sent them through the Dale Carnegie course. And the
Okay.
Dale Carnegie course was all about um, forming relationships, his classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, but it was also about communication.
Hmm.
And the things that I started learning in that course were very key. Like, all of a sudden, all the warning signs, just, all the things that I had tried to brush over and hide, it's like they just all came like popping up in front
Yes.
of my face, where it's like I could not ignore them. And it was like, okay, this is, and it was a process. It wasn't just like one day I was like, okay, I'm done. Over probably 2 to 3 months. I mean, there were times when I packed a bag and left and went and slept on my brother's couch.
Hmm.
And just so you know, that was pretty desperate because at the time, my brother is 4 years younger than me. So
Okay.
he was in his bachelor pad with his roommate, and it smelled like gym socks and stale cigarette butts. So there were a couple of times where I literally left and went
Yeah.
and slept on my brother's couch. So it was kind of this progression, and there were, several things I had to work through. I felt super guilty about leaving my pets behind.
Yeah.
And I remember a woman who was probably about 15 years older than me who had been through divorce in the past. And I remember going to lunch with her, and she said, Christine, if you're worried about the pets and that's your biggest worry, like, you're done with this relationship. You just have to trust, like, even though he's a jerk, that he will figure out a way to take care of these pets. Because I knew if I moved in with my dad, like, I was just lucky they were taking me. I wasn't going to push my luck with, two cats and a dog. And it broke
Sure.
my heart to leave my pets behind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just remember, my dad had taken me out to lunch. And then when we were in the car afterwards, he said, you just don't seem like you're happy. And I said, I'm not. And then I
Yeah.
broke down and I cried. And he said, well, here's what I'm willing to do for you. So
Wow.
uh yeah, basically one day when he was at work, I went in and I got as much stuff as possible and
That was
left.
it.
That was
Wow.
it. And within 3 weeks, he had another woman moved in.
Of course he did. Of course he did. Hello. How else was he going to survive? But I do
Yeah.
want to point something
Uh,
out, and that is that one, when you're ready, right? There's a lot of women who suffer in silence. They're not telling people what's really going on in the inner workings of their relationship. Their spirit is dying, right? I see you having
mm-hmm.
this experience. But when you get to the point where you're tired of being tired, right? And the
Yes.
frustration has become so overwhelming that you finally tell someone, isn't it interesting how you actually almost always have a soft place to land,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's never as challenging or as scary as people, or as you make it seem, not people,
Right.
because it's really all in here,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'd love to just, before we move on to talking more about what came from that situation, I'd love to just understand the emotion that you felt when you finally exited that relationship. And even though there was probably, and I don't want to put anything on it, but I know I'll just speak for myself. If I had to move back in with my mom, oh my gosh, the whew, that's a whole episode within itself. So I'd love to just hear maybe a snippet of some of the emotions, some of the potentially shame, some of the fears that you had doing what society would call taking a step back. Not
Yeah.
necessarily, because sometimes you have to take a step back to get
Yeah.
clarity and build that momentum, obviously, to move
Yeah.
forward. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, of course, knowing that there was a safe escape hatch and a plan, I'm a Capricorn. I like plans.
Okay, that says it all. That says it all.
Gotta have a plan before we take action. And so, just it was almost like I felt like I was escaping from prison. It almost felt
Yeah,
like a prison
I could
break.
see that.
Like, when I got all my stuff and left, it was almost like I felt like I was like, oh my God, let's hurry up and get out of here. And I didn't want him to come home and, catch
Yeah.
me and my brother and a couple of his friends, like getting as much stuff out as we could. And, it was just like, finally, that freedom. But there was still, um, I still had to deal with some things because we were financially entangled. His car was in my name
Mhm.
because his license was suspended. He was under my insurance. And so there were some things that still had to
The
be
untangling, the
yeah, yeah. And I don't think we really talk about that much when it comes to divorce or ending relationships. And yeah, there was definitely shame about my financial situation because literally every single bill I had was behind. Like
okay.
everything was in collections, everything. And so I was dealing with collectors. I had to get my car payment caught up. And so there was a lot of shame that I was working through, especially, even though my dad was very
Supportive.
non-judgmental, very loving, very supportive. Um, it was just the fact that I felt like I had disappointed him because he had taught me the right things.
You came face to face with all of your like deepest fears in a sense, especially being a
Yeah.
people pleaser. And I think that
Yes.
people pleaser, right? That
Hmm.
pattern, it originates with our original relationships, which is our
Yeah.
parents. So I can only imagine. But I'm really one that believes that every challenge is actually an opportunity. And you're a
Yeah.
living, walking, breathing example of that. Because not only did you have to kind of confront that people pleaser and work through that, but you also
Hmm.
then was in a position to have to figure out how you were going to rebuild, reinvent yourself, what was next. And so,
Yeah.
yes, walk us on that journey.
Yeah. So, in all honesty, looking, sitting down with my dad and looking at that financial mess, it was almost like walking through your front door after a tornado has struck your house and all the
Yeah,
back windows are blown out, right? So it's like everything is a mess and it's just so overwhelming and you don't even know where to start. And so what my dad did was the equivalent of saying, "Hey, look at me. You see this closet right here? Organize and clean this closet. Like, don't look at anything else. Just take care of this closet." So
yeah,
that was really what he did, where he said, "Okay, here's the bill we're going to attack first and get caught up." Right? Like, just pay the minimum, right? Let's look at everything that you've got ongoing that has to be paid, but let's focus on this one first and let's knock that out of the way. Like, this is the only thing I want you to focus on for the next 2 weeks. And then we'll sit back down when you get paid again, and then we'll see
that's
what's next on the
beautiful.
list.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so now that's something that I carry forward into my coaching, because when I first meet with a client and we start going over their numbers, I mean, I can find 18 homework items for them.
of course. Yes.
However, I'm like, okay, you're going to do these three things in between now and our next session in 2 weeks. And then, and sometimes if they're very motivated, they will do those three things and they will start proactively doing some things on their own
Yeah.
too, which is what I started doing after about 2 or 3 months of working with my dad. It was like, yeah, I can take care of this thing too. But now that my confidence was built up
Yeah.
and I didn't have a grown man child sucking half of my money away,
Right.
I actually had money to pay my bills and get them caught up.
I have a couple of questions here. So one, what was the industry you worked with your dad? Was he in the financial industry or was he just pretty
No.
financially savvy?
Yeah, he was just always financially savvy. He owns a machine tool company, which
Okay.
is, very, very masculine industry.
Yeah.
But I was working in accounting. So I
Okay.
was, I
Huh.
was the staff accountant. I reported to somebody else. I worked for the family business for 13 years. And by the time I left, I was vice president of HR and accounting.
Very good. So you
Yeah.
essentially went to your financial training ground on the
Hmm.
business side while you were working with your dad.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is I always worked in accounting or banking. Like, in
Okay.
college, I had my first financial job as a bank teller. So
Okay.
I worked as a bank teller. I worked in Citibank in collections while
Wow.
I was in that relationship. Like,
Yes.
that was the one card I would never let go behind while I was working there.
Right.
And then when I graduated from college, I went to work as an accountant for an interior decorator. So that
Well, I'm
was,
glad you're saying this though, because so many people look at financial professionals, whether it's, certified financial professionals, people who work at banks, whatever, people who work in finance, and they think they have it all figured out. And it's
yeah,
very different. Business finance and being in finance in a position with a company, these are all very different than personal finance. And I can
yeah.
relate with you on this because I think you already know that my late husband was in the financial industry. So he kind of
Mhm.
forced me to get a financial education, kicking and screaming. I didn't want to. I'm like, you handle it. Right. I think a lot of women
Yeah.
can relate to that. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
that's your part. But
Right.
he really forced me to learn financial education. He took me on that journey, and I was really happy that he did because when he passed away in 2009, I inherited the financial business and I had four children to take care of. So
Yeah.
it was like, even though I knew the knowledge here, I learned really quickly that it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. What matters
Hmm.
is, can you implement it? That
Yeah.
shit was no joke. Yeah, right. And so
You're
you're
right.
going through and you have all the knowledge, you know what to do, but actually
Hmm.
executing it is like, sometimes you'll make these mistakes and you, and tell me if you experience this, you beat yourself up
Oh,
because you're
yeah.
like, I know better, like I understand how this works. How did I get here? So talk
Yeah.
me through how you got from that space of like, I know these things, or I should have known these things. How did
Right.
I get here to this, um, what is it? This downfall or rock bottom, I think is how you called it.
Hmm.
This is going to become the catalyst to me and how I'm showing up and how I'm supporting people in the world. Tell us about that gap.
One of the things that I got really curious about on my journey to financial recovery is just what you said. Like, why do smart people do dumb things with money? Right.
Cheers to that one,
I
sister.
mean, I was on the honor roll like all through school. It was like I was not stupid. I knew
Yes.
these things, and yet I didn't do them. And what I realized was it's because money is emotional.
Ding,
So
ding, ding.
when I hit financial rock
Yes.
bottom, it was the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
No one was talking about money mindset.
Mm-hmm.
No one was talking about behavioral finance. It was not even a field within psychology at that
Yes.
point. It was really just, you were starting to hear things about the psychology of money back then, just like, you know, little drips here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But I had always been fascinated by psychology. And in fact, I have a psychology minor
Wow.
despite having an accounting major because I loved psychology so much. I actually went to school an extra semester, so I have a double minor in business
Okay.
administration and psychology. So I've always been fascinated by human behavior. My mom is a retired social worker, and so I really just started getting curious about that. And the other thing that I noticed was that all of the money gurus that were out there were completely leaving that out of the picture. They were
Yes.
saying things like, if you want to fix your finances, here's my 9-step plan and just do these steps or use this formula or use these percentages for your budget. And I'm like, this doesn't work for everybody.
Yes.
And, I spent 10 years facilitating one of these money gurus financial programs at my church for free.
Okay.
And about halfway through, I found out that I could get certified as a financial coach because what
Beautiful.
I thought was, okay, my church is bringing in this program. I'm going to volunteer to help because I felt like God had gotten me through that tough spot, and this is my volunteer work. This is how I'm giving back.
Mhm.
And so, the participants that went through, they were really drawn to me because I was openly sharing my story about
Story.
like, hey, I've been through this. I've done it all the wrong way, even though I knew better. So, if you're not feeling great about yourself, like join the club,
Right.
like don't be embarrassed by this. And I had already started doing some one-on-one coaching with people. And when I got the certification, it wasn't because I was thinking about a career, because the whole plan was my brother and I would take over the leadership of the family business at some point. I just thought I should know how to coach these people. If I'm, it's like I'm kind of doing it haphazardly. I should probably know how to do it right. And what I found was when I decided to start doing the coaching as a part time business, that my first clients were people that had flunked out of that guru's program. And then I'm like, what is it about this that makes people not be able to stick with it? And so I started like trying these different tweaks that I was learning through psychology and saying, okay, well, what if we don't cut out all of the fun, right? Because that's what this guru was saying. Like, if you're in debt, you need to
Yeah.
stop eating out, eat beans and rice, drive a beater. And I'm like, the problem with that is after 3 or 4 months of that, people burn out. And so I'm
Yes.
like, okay, well, let's screw this gazelle intensity. Why don't we just like have this be like a nice little horse trot instead of a gazelle run?
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, well, let's make progress on our goals, but let's also build in room for fun so you don't feel burnt out. So that's what I started doing, is looking at each of these areas of personal finance and taking the things that I was doing in psychology to say, how can we plug into these powerful emotions and harness them and use them to pull us forward? And also, what are ways that we can like turn the volume down on some of these destructive emotions? And just, and so this basically culminated in me creating my financial dignity framework, which puts those two very important things together.
Yeah.
I see people out there just teaching money mindset and like, just think positive and have all these affirmations. And I'm like, yeah, but you also have to have a plan to pay off your debt to go
For
along
sure.
with that. It's like you can't do that and then never look at your spending. And so putting those two things together was really what I did with that first book, With Money is Emotional, to say, yes, here are the practical things that you need to do. And then here are the emotional pitfalls that you might encounter. And here's some some things to try to work around them. Um, and so that's really how I became known as, the expert that brought together the money and emotions.
I love
Because
it.
you've probably heard financial professionals say, just turn off your emotions and make the logical decision. Well,
Yeah.
we're human, we can't do that.
Well, yeah, and especially us as women, we're naturally, emotional creatures, right?
Yes,
And
yeah,
it's funny because you're speaking to all of the reasons that I was not happy to take over the financial business because it always
right.
felt so rigid. And
Mm-hmm.
one of my highest core values is play. Another highest core
Mm-hmm.
value is freedom. And
Right.
there was no play and no freedom within that structure. And so it's hilarious because now, 25 years later, I've been in that business for 25 years. Um, I have develop my own way. And
Mm-hmm.
what used to make me feel kind of ostracized and like the outlier within those environments when I was more active in that business is now what my superpower became. And I want to
Yeah.
point that out for the listeners because a lot of times we may be feeling resistant to something or we may feel like we don't fit in certain rooms. Take that as a little whisper that perhaps you're meant to embrace it, you're meant to learn it, and then present
Mm-hmm.
it in a different way to a different audience because that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because what you do and what you speak about and how you frame these things fits so perfectly with the anatomy of abundance framework that
Mm-hmm.
I've created because the first three steps of the system are mental, emotional, and psychological, right? Who am
Mm-hmm.
I? What are my core values and my guiding principles? What kind of a life do I even want to create?
Yeah.
And then you come in with the lower three steps of the framework, which is to declare, organize, and move in action. And so if we
Mm-hmm.
had to really codify what you do, that's what you do is
Yeah.
you sit down with people and you're like, hey, what do you want? You probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you probably have some conversations to really identify the emotions that are driving the behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
and then you create the plan for your clients. And not only do you create the plan, but you actually walk them through that journey. And so tell us a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about kind of how I know you have the book club, which is awesome. And I know you
Yeah.
have the podcast, which is great. But your actual clients, what does that process of working with them look like? And how long do you typically work with your clients?
Yeah. So there is a general framework that I
Mhm.
take all of my clients through. There is an initial 6 months, which is
Okay.
my financial dignity coaching. I would
Okay.
say about 70% of my clients go into the annual maintenance
Okay.
where, we meet twice a quarter instead of twice a month because they want that continued support and they have more progress that they want to make. But the very first thing is exactly what you said, is sitting down and defining what success looks like for them. And also, what are the things that they're dissatisfied with in their
Hmm.
life right now? Um, so just understanding, okay, what do we want success to look like? And the question I always ask people is, if you woke up tomorrow and felt really good about your money, what has changed? Like, what is there more of? What is there less of? And then that just really starts to get their juices flowing. Um, and so then we actually look at, where are you right now? Let's look at, what are you spending on these different things? What are your assets? What are your liabilities? And we just get that all down on paper, because awareness is the first step for
Agreed.
making change, because you can't change something if you're not aware of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And then I get them set up on a personal finance app. And it's something that we use together. So I
I
find
love it.
that many people are intimidated by the technology, especially like getting everything set up. So this is something that I actually do for my clients. I pay for their app while we're working together.
Oh,
And yeah, and so it's set up so that, I can go in there and see things. I can go in and help them make changes. And in between our sessions that we have twice a month, their homework is to go in to look at, what's going on in the app, to make sure that everything is being classified properly. So we're actually like building this weekly habit of what I call the money date, where you're
yes.
actually sitting down, if you're married or in a committed relationship, with your spouse, and you're looking at the numbers.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so interesting because many times they will find things and say, like, oh, I don't like that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna cancel that subscription, or I haven't used that personal trainer in 3 months. Like, what am I doing still paying for this? And
100%.
so, I always tell people, like, I'm not the budget Nazi. I'm not gonna come in and say, like, you gotta stop doing that, you gotta stop doing that, you gotta stop doing that. Like, my goal is to help people get very crystal clear on what's important to them, and show them ways where they can redirect money towards what's important to them and away
Yes.
from the things that aren't
That's my
important.
favorite. You said a couple of my favorite things. One is that you empower them to make the decisions. You're not the Nazi
Yes.
telling them what to and not to do. Like we're all
Yeah.
grown-ups. That's one thing. The second
Mm-hmm.
thing you said is oh God, what did you just say? Oh, I forgot the last thing. It was so good. But I'll just go back to something else I was thinking about is that you were talking about the money dates. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that I love to talk about in my step 3, which is sacred self-care. And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of liken it to treating yourself as if you are the divine, mind, body,
Yes.
spirit, physical, and financial. And
Mm-hmm.
so this money date situation, not only, I mean, it really goes back to what you said about awareness. This is the way we become aware is having a ritual essentially for sitting down with our money and
Mm-hmm.
cultivating that relationship and taking a look at what do I like? What do I don't like? What do I need to shift? Right. I love
Yeah.
the idea of doing it with a partner, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
God, you had said something. I wish I hadn't lost it, but I left it. I lost it. I was like, such a great point. But that's okay. What I do want to ask you as we're starting to kind of round out this conversation is so for someone who maybe isn't in a position currently, or maybe they just haven't gotten to the place where they're willing to ask for help, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
know I work with mostly women, and so we have to get past that
Yeah.
part first before we can even,
Right.
right, asking and receiving for help. What would be some first steps that you would tell a woman out there, or period? Do you just work with women? You work with everyone.
Yeah, I work with everyone. I think a lot of women are just attracted to my style. I
Yes.
do work with a lot of couples.
Okay. And I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. You can almost act as like the mediator and the
Oh,
getting on the same page and speaking the same language. That's amazing.
I have people all the time say, I feel like you're kind of like our marriage counselor too.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
I said,
Yes.
well, yeah, there is a little bit of that. But I mean, that's the thing. I am willing to sit in the discomfort
Yes.
of a couple who is not quite on the same page.
Hmm.
And I think many other financial professionals are not willing to sit in that discomfort.
Yes.
So I think that is, I think that is something that is unique to
So
what
for
I do.
someone, a person, a couple
Yeah.
who are in a position where they know something needs to change, they may not even exactly know what needs to change. What would
Yeah.
be some first steps that you would suggest to them to just start bringing the awareness and getting more clarity on what needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of very easy, low hanging fruit. I mean, obviously, just looking at your spending. I mean, so many people, especially because now everything's online, you're not even
Yes.
getting a statement in the mail,
Right.
right? From your credit card. So it's just like a shock when you see, like, oh, this payment just came out of my account. Like,
Yes.
what was that even for? So many people are just disconnected with the details. So even just taking a little bit of time to look at the bank account, look at the credit card statements, and see where everything is going. Um, and, just plugging into a podcast or reading a personal finance book together with your spouse, like Money is
Yeah, reading
Emotional.
together is sexy. Yes.
Yes.
You'd
Hey,
be
you can even listen
surprised.
to it. You
Doesn't
can
matter
listen
what
to it
you're
in the
reading.
car. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting you say this, people not wanting to admit that they need help.
Hmm.
And um, I have just released a brand new product, which is her name is Emma, the emotional money coach, and she is actually a custom chat GPT that lives inside
Okay.
your chat GPT account. She's been programmed with almost 900 pages of my knowledge
Wow.
plus my personality.
You know what's funny? It's
So
almost like you're psychic because I did have my follow-up question was going to be like, how are you utilizing AI in your work? And there you go. That's brilliant.
yeah. So this is for people who are like, maybe they don't feel like they need my full coaching. Most of the clients that I work with one on one are making, 250 to 300 grand or more a year.
Hmm.
And so they may not be able to afford $7,000 for a 6 month coaching package, but, for less than a tenth of that price, they can have access to all of my knowledge within their chat GPT and
Fantastic.
ask questions about, like, hey, my cousin just asked to borrow $2,000 to pay her rent. What do I do? Like, I don't really feel like I should give her the money, right? But like, I don't know what to say to her. And so then you can have this conversation with Emma, which is basically me, about, and, getting to the bottom of the emotional drivers behind the decision
Mm.
before looking at the numbers of the decision.
That's brilliant. I mean, drop
Yeah.
mic moment. I would drop my mic, but it's precious. So, so wonderful. Then, with that,
Yeah.
let us know where people can find you. Do you hang out on any of the social media channels? Is your website best? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah. If
You
you
and
want to go,
Emma.
yes. So if you go to my website, which is my name, ChristineLuken.com, you can find everything there. I am active on social media. I'm most active on Facebook, LinkedIn,
Okay.
and Instagram. So if you just search my name, you will find me.
Wonderful. And we'll also put everything in the show notes for ease. I want to thank you so much. I just love you. You and
Oh,
also Cassandra, who, I met through your podcast. I
yes.
interviewed her as well. And literally, I just cannot wait until I come back on that side of the world and hopefully get to connect with you ladies in person. But it's just amazing how we can connect so deeply on Zoom, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Or through these digital channels. So I
Yeah.
just want to thank everyone for joining today. I know you got a ton from this podcast. Hopefully you took some notes. If you didn't, go back and listen again because our podcast is here not to entertain you, but to actually transform your life. So thank you so much again for joining us. And we'll see you again next week on Living Room Wisdom, where your story is your glory. Make sure you subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Bye. Thanks again, Christine.
Thank you.